It's that time of the week again.
Google Earth is a fantastic tool. You can tour a three-dimensional rendition of the Grand Canyon while just sitting at your desk and Wotan's throne, whatever that is. You can even see the infamous uppercase Y in Sandusky on the entrance ramp to Route 2 in Amherst. Why is it there? No idea. You can see it, though. And of course you got Google Street View, which at this point is pretty much a national pastime. You can see a lot of cool things. These are my two good friends. You know who you are. Hello. So Google Earth now has satellite imagery available for about the past 20 years, and a lot of stuff has happened in those past 20 years. In particular, there have been a ton of natural disasters since the year 2000, and you can actually view the damage from those natural disasters on Google Earth. And today I want to focus on my top 10 tornado damage paths that you can see on Google Earth today. Before we start, I want to mention a lot of the tornadoes I'm going to be talking about today have first-person videos of people getting directly hit by the tornado. I'm not going to show those videos in my video, number one, because some of them are really disturbing, and number two, if I survived a tornado and I filmed it, I wouldn't want somebody just ripping that video and throwing it up on their YouTube channel. I will be timestamping each of the tornadoes, though, and putting links in the description to those videos so you can go watch them yourself. To kick things off, I want to go back to 2003, and if I recall correctly, Google Earth came out in 2005, but they do have some very old imagery available to the public. This is the town of Manchester. This picture was taken in 1991. Manchester, South Dakota, I believe at the time there were 3 or 4 families living there. As you can see, it only has really 3 or 4 different streets, and from my understanding, there used to be a water pump in the middle of town. In the 1900s, it was actually a bit of a bigger town. It had different things like a town hall, grocery stores, barns, a lumber yard, grain elevators, had a cream station, a bank, a pool hall. So I don't think this image from 1991 really does the town history justice. Fun fact, the sister of the author of Little House on the Prairie actually spent a lot of her life in Manchester. Unfortunately for all of them and the town's history, that came to a crashing end on June 24, 2003. A massive EF4 tornado came through the town and pretty much wiped it clean. Storm chaser Reed Timmer was actually there chasing the storm, and he filmed this video. It's one of the quintessential tornado videos of the early 2000s. You've probably seen it, but if you haven't, here's a clip.
Back up! Back up! Okay, keep going, keep going, keep going, keep going!
And here's the town 3 months after the tornado. Supposedly the water pump was right here in this little sort of boulevard strip. And all the trees are gone. There's a couple barns still standing, but yeah, pretty much nothing left. Today it looks like somebody bought some property. They got a barn going, they have a little house over here, and there's something over here as well. There's actually a little granite memorial and plaque in the center of town that explains what happened the day of the tornado. And if you're ever in the middle of South Dakota and you're, 5 miles away, I would stop by and give it a look. Next up, we have the town of Pilger, Nebraska, where an unfortunate weather event took place in 2014.
Looking toward the east, he's got one tornado on his left and one tornado on his right, very clearly outlined right now on the Doppler scope. This is pretty remarkable stuff. I can't recall ever seeing something like this before.
Pilger was a small Midwestern town in Nebraska of about 350 people, and it was clearly a railroad town if you just look at the layout of it. You can see how this diagonal road kind of cuts through the town here, and you have one parallel to the north, and how the dividing line of these two parcels kind of continues on the line on which this road runs. And I would probably bet that these grain storage silos were right on top of where the old railroad station was. It's your standard Midwestern tiny town surrounded by a bunch of different fields. You got a baseball field right here, probably where the kids used to play. This looks like an old schoolhouse over here. Probably got some 100-plus-year-old trees here, considering this town was formed in 1887. And then the tornado hits, and clearly something's not right. Most tornadoes go from a southwest to northeast trajectory, and clearly that's the case for Pilger. The first thing you notice is the silos are completely gone. There's just grain in piles on the ground. Many of the houses within this half-mile strip are just completely gone. Others have irreparable damage. You can see a lot of cars parked on the baseball field. These are likely a bunch of volunteers that are helping to clean up the city. If you look at Pilger today, you can see the silos are back, which is nice, but everything within this diagonal stretch here, right in the vicinity of where the tornado hit, is pretty much gone. There are no trees, and a lot of people just decided not to rebuild, which I don't blame them. Here's some street view before the tornado. You can see they had a pretty nice looking public school. They had several basketball courts. They had a really nice looking playground for kids. And then it is no longer existing. It was directly in the path of the tornado, just to the north of the grain silos, so it's pretty sad. Coming in at the number 8 spot is the Washington, Illinois tornado that happened on November 17th, 2013.
We have just received confirmation of a large and potentially extremely dangerous tornado that's near Washington.
I remember this day pretty well. I was a kid in high school, and I set up a camera outside my window trying to film a squall line of storms that came by. They came in right when I was at drum lessons, I believe. And then I came home, and I spent like 3 or 4 hours rewatching the footage trying to find lightning strikes, because that was the goal. I knew I wasn't going to see a tornado. And I found nothing, so I was pretty disappointed. However, people of Washington got a lot more than lightning that day. So these subdivisions look relatively young, and that doesn't give me a lot of confidence in the structural integrity of the house in terms of will it stand up to an EF4 tornado. And clearly they were not. All of these houses are very much beyond saving in terms of those that were in the direct path of the tornado. But, several hundred feet to the left or the right, a lot of these houses just have some roof damage. I mean, it's probably fixable. So there's a man named Mark Wells who took a direct hit from this tornado, and he filmed the entire thing. It's a pretty scary video, but he and his wife did survive, and I'm going to link to that in the description if you'd like to view it. One thing that you'll notice with a lot of these tornadoes is the way in which they mature, meaning that they touch down and they're relatively small, and as they continue on their track, their damage path grows a lot wider. As we head off to the southeast here, I want to point something out. This right here is called ground scouring. A lot of people, when they think of a tornado, they think of it moving in a straight line, when in reality, the actual suction vortex in the center of the tornado is moving in a spiral motion as it continues down that straight line path. So that explains the slinky-like appearance that you see whenever you get ground scouring from a tornado. And this ground scouring continues for about 30 or so miles. You can see if we follow it here, there's a lot of small dotted farmhouses, and some of these were extremely lucky where they were, 500 feet away from the actual damage path, and others were very unlucky where their farmstead was just completely destroyed, like this guy here. If you look at Washington today, it does appear like most of these houses were rebuilt, which is really good to see. So there is one singular day that accounts for 3 of the tornado damage paths on this list. And if you're a weather enthusiast, you probably already know what I'm going to say. So here's pretty much the entire state of Alabama. I'm going to switch satellite images here from 2010 to 2011. Tell me if you notice anything here. You see anything different? Do you see any diagonal lines that were not there before that are just pretty much everywhere across the entire state? Those are all tornado damage paths that occurred on April 27, 2011. I believe there were 298 tornadoes in total on this day, the vast majority being in Alabama. And because Alabama has a lot of trees, and because these tornadoes were all extremely violent, we can see pretty clear scars in the ground from where they were. So coming in at number 7 is the Lake Martin tornado. And this tornado didn't really affect too many people. There's some houses along Lake Martin here. As you can see, it's kind of it's a really beautiful lake towards the eastern side of the state. And if we switch over to after the outbreak, you can see this really clear just scour in the ground where there used to be, a lot of trees here, and now there are pretty much none. I've seen some people wonder whether or not, a tornado moving over a body of water, can affect its intensity or the dynamics within it. And here is a pretty clear example where most of the time, no. Tornadoes can just steamroll over, a pretty sizable lake. I don't know, this is about a mile wide, and maintain full intensity while doing so. And especially in this area, you have a lot of people who've built houses right on the edge of the lake. They have their own little dock. It seems like a very, very beautiful place. And then a tornado just comes through and destroys your whole livelihood. If we switch to imagery today, you can still very clearly see the absence of trees all throughout here, and this is a tornado damage path that I think we're going to see for years to come. Next on this list is another tornado from the April 27th, 2011 outbreak. I think it was the only EF5 tornado to occur on that day. And by the way, here's the tornado intensity scale. Basically, we can tell how fast the winds were moving in the tornado based on the amount of damage that it caused. And the more damage, the higher the scale. The current highest that we have is EF5, which is pretty much catastrophic damage. Hackleburg is a small town in northwest Alabama. It had about 1,500 people in the 2010 census. It was originally a stop on Jackson's Military Road, which connected Nashville, Tennessee, and New Orleans. And it was named for hackberry trees in the area, which personally I've never even heard of. Unfortunately, this tornado destroyed about 75% of the town and killed 18 people, primarily affecting the northern half of the city. The tornado associated with the Hackleburg storm was completely rain-wrapped, which means that you could not see the physical tornado behind the sheets of rain, which makes it all the more terrifying to just see this giant low cloud just moving through your town. And unfortunately, in an EF5 tornado, if you are not underground, your chances of surviving are pretty low. The good news is that although it seems like the town's a lot more sparse today, most of the residents actually moved back. There are only about 100 less people in Hackleburg than there were before the tornado came through. Coming in at number 5 is a city that is way too familiar with tornadoes. Once again, if you're a weather enthusiast, you probably already know what I'm going to say. Moore, Oklahoma.
Folks, this is heading into Moore. This is heading into Moore. This tornado is heading into Moore from the Newcastle Casino.
Moore is a southern suburb of the Oklahoma City metro area. Moore is one of the larger cities on this list, having about 60,000 people today. The city itself has seen 9 tornadoes between 1998 and 2015. That is 17 years. Of those 9 tornadoes, there are 2 really significant ones. The first one was on May 3rd, 1999. That was an F5 that went through Moore. That one, unfortunately, we don't have Google imagery for. However, on May 20th, 2013, the same thing happened again, and this one was particularly devastating. Here's the city of Moore in 2012, and if we skip to May 2013, you can see clearly something's not right here. The tornado touched down on the far west side of town, hitting a couple houses before crossing the Canadian River and the interstate. And after that, this thing grew into an absolute monster. These 2 images here are 5 minutes apart. It continued its rampage to the east, intensifying as it entered a densely populated area. It's honestly incredible. With these hundreds and hundreds of houses that were damaged, only 24 people were killed. Unfortunately, this tornado occurred on a school day and during school hours, and it hit 2 elementary schools. This first one on the west side of Moore is Briarwood Elementary, and as you can see, it clearly is no longer standing. A mile or so to the east is Plaza Towers Elementary School, and this one was a little bit more devastating. I believe 7 third graders were killed. Apparently in Oklahoma, the vast majority of elementary schools have safe rooms in case of a tornado, but for some reason, these 2 elementary schools didn't have a safe room, and they were the only schools to be completely destroyed by this tornado. The tornado continued on to the east, and from this point, its path became a bit more erratic. The local hospitals seem to have taken a direct hit, but it looks remarkably good for an F5 tornado. From there, the tornado crossed over Interstate 35 and continued on its path to the east, and it started to shrink a little bit, which is kind of part of the life cycle of a tornado. However, if you look at this damage, it still is pretty intense. I'd say about EF4, EF5 damage. The size of a tornado doesn't necessarily equate to its strength. You can have a really small tornado that can still be an EF5. If you look at Moore today, you can see a very faint scar where this tornado went through. And you can see a couple blank lots here and there where people decided not to rebuild, but it seems like the vast majority of people decided to return to Moore. Coming in at the number 4 spot, we're going back to April 27th, 2011. And probably the biggest city affected by the tornadoes that day was Tuscaloosa.
Let's pan over to the left.
Oh my goodness. Look at that.
Are you kidding me?
Look at all the stuff flying around up there.
That's coming over near Interstate 359 in Skyland. Nobody should be out there.
The storm that produced the Tuscaloosa tornado was absolutely insane. I think it produced multiple tornadoes over its several hundred-mile track. If you look here in eastern Alabama, you can see a tornado path starts, goes south of Scuba, kind of lifts a little bit here in western Alabama, touches the ground again, and you can see the scar goes right through Tuscaloosa, right up north of Birmingham. Seems to lift a little bit. The storm makes a little bit of a right turn. It drops another tornado here. You can see a damage path south of Gadsden. And this continues all the way into Georgia, where it eventually lifts somewhere over here. It's absolutely insane. Tuscaloosa, as a lot of you people know who are fans of college football, is where the University of Alabama is. And this thing came scarily close to hitting the University of Alabama. So this right here is Bryant-Denny Stadium, and the center of the tornado damage path is about 1.25 miles away. In fact, I would bet that all the housing here that you see is where a bunch of the students live off campus. And of course, for those that were in the path, the damage was catastrophic. If you compare this damage with the Moore tornado, it's definitely less significant, albeit still catastrophic. Some of the interior walls and parts of the roofs are still standing on these houses, but the damage is still irreparable. You're going to have to raise and rebuild. So this right here is the University Mall. There's actually a video from a guy in the parking lot of this University Mall watching the tornado pass, catty corner to his parking spot. After hitting the city of Tuscaloosa, the tornado continued to the northeast, and you can clearly see the wind field of this tornado just expanded by about half a mile. It went through a densely forested and relatively rural area as it made its way towards the Birmingham metro. There were a couple really hard-hit areas in the Birmingham metro as well. One of them is the Concord community. The other just to the east is the Pleasant Grove community, and one thing you'll notice is the wind field on this tornado is very large. You can see trees are bent from here all the way down to here, but houses are still standing right where the trees are bent. So that means that the wind field gets more and more intense towards the center of the tornado, and this maybe, I don't know, a few hundred feet stretch is where the EF4 winds occurred, and this is the area where houses are destroyed. Thankfully, the tornado stayed several miles north of the Birmingham metro, and although it's very unfortunate for the communities affected, it really could have been a lot worse. Look at how densely populated this area is. I think the last area with EF4 damage is the North Pratt community. You can see it's a similar story over here. It continues into Smith Estates, and then the tornado starts to weaken a bit. It makes a bit of a left turn up towards Fultondale, and in this area the path is actually really hard to see because the winds have weakened quite a bit. From this point on, this tornado lifts, and then the storm drops another tornado to the southeast of Aniata. Overall, 64 people were killed from this tornado, and I think over 1,500 were injured, and you're probably thinking, what could possibly top this tornado? Ah, yes, Joplin, Missouri, one of the old stops on Route 66. Is that right? I think that's right. Joplin's a city in southwest Missouri with about 50,000 people, and on May 22, 2011, the 7th deadliest tornado in U.S. history hit the south side of the city. Very similar to the Hackleburg situation, this EF5 tornado was rain-wrapped, so it was virtually impossible to see. It dropped on the west side of town, moved south of the Iron Gates community, and continued east towards Joplin High School. There's so much CCTV footage from places within this damage path of when the tornado hit, and it's really terrifying. This is some of the worst tornado damage that you're going to see today. With a lot of these houses in the center, you can see that debris was actually swept pretty cleanly off the foundation of these homes. This tornado alone killed 160 people, and it's pretty evident that if you weren't underground, you had a pretty slim chance of surviving. At the time that this tornado hit Joplin High School, the wind field was about a mile wide, and the interior EF5 damage was about a quarter of a mile wide. The tornado continued east out of a residential area and entered a more corporate area. There was a Walmart, an Aldi, a Home Depot right in its path. One of the most terrifying videos I've seen to come from this tornado was a guy who was stuck inside the old Fast Strip gas station on East 20th Street. In this video, you don't really see anything. It's completely dark, but you can hear everything, and it is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. The guy who took the footage provided an update video where he showed the aftermath of the Fast Strip gas station, and he showed exactly where in the beer cooler everyone took shelter. And incredibly, it was the only part of the gas station that was still standing. It wasn't really standing, but it did provide shelter from an EF5 tornado. If we look at Joplin today, you can clearly tell that there's a lot less trees on the south side of town. There are definitely some empty lots here and there, but much like Moore, it appears like most of the people have moved back into Joplin. We just showed the damage path from the 7th deadliest tornado in U.S. history. What could possibly beat that? Absolutely everyone watching this video is going to disagree with me, but I put the Fairdale tornado at number 2.
Northwest of Rochelle, moving northeast at 45 miles per hour. Now is the time to seek shelter immediately.
Fairdale is a very small town in DeKalb County, Illinois that had about 150 people in 2012. There's really not a lot to this community. It looks like about 8 blocks with a few dozen houses and a few dozen families. And unfortunately, on April 9th, 2015, this town took a direct hit from an EF4 tornado. In my opinion, visually, this tornado is one of the most terrifying I've ever seen. The way that the wall cloud and the mesocyclone kind of spiral down into the tornado, the way it's sunlit on one side and dark on the other. So this tornado actually dropped down a few miles west of Rochelle. And although it hit a pretty small subdivision over here, it stayed on rural farmland for most of its trek. You can see a lot of ground scouring right here, and you can see just how intense that center vortex was. And unfortunately, as it continued on its path to the northeast, the town of Fairdale took a direct hit. So this is a street view image of a house in Fairdale from 2012. There was an 85-year-old man by the name of Clarence Schultz living in this house with his wife the day that the tornado hit. Clarence decided to film the tornado out his window as he was taking a direct hit, and it's one of the few videos where you can actually see what it's like to be inside the center of a tornado. As you can see, this house here was his, and after the tornado hit, it was no longer standing. Immediately after the tornado struck, Brian Ruck, who lived just south of the EF4 damage, took a video of him walking through town, making sure that everyone was okay. Although this tornado only killed 2 people, I think that the visible damage, along with Clarence's backstory and video, and then Brian's supporting video of the aftermath, it's a really terrifying situation. And today there's definitely a lack of trees in the northern side of town, but a lot of people did decide to rebuild. So now we're down to the number 1 spot, and I wanted to pick a town that was completely obliterated by a tornado and just rendered unrecognizable.
From the National Weather Service, a tornado emergency now in effect for Greensburg in Kiowa County.
Greensburg, Kansas is a small town in central Kansas. It had a population of about 1,500 in the 2000 census. Fun fact, Greensburg, Kansas today is known as a model green town. A lot of their public buildings have been built to the highest certification of the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Looking at this image, one could guess at one point Greensburg was named after the lush amount of trees it has. It looks like it had quite a few. Unfortunately, all of that changed on May 4th, 2007. 95% of the city was destroyed by an EF5 tornado. Very few houses on the far eastern side and far western side of the town were spared with EF2, EF3 damage, but everything else seemed to be at a total loss. It's honestly a bit surprising to me that only 11 people were killed by this particular tornado just because of how many people were in its path. One thing that's absolutely true, though, is if people were watching the news, they had plenty of lead time and they knew that this tornado was coming, which allowed them to take the proper tornado precautions and go to the basement. Of those 15 or so hundred people that lived there before the tornado hit, only half of them live there today. Building-wise, the center of town is looking incredibly sparse, and it might take half a century for those trees to grow back to what they once were. Looking at street view, driveways leading to nowhere is kind of the norm. In fact, some of these driveways have been turned into alleys that cut through the middle of these fields. I do hope that Greensburg is able to continue to grow in population. It does have some really cool things going for it. And that wraps up my opinion of the top 10 tornado damage paths you can currently view on Google Earth. Let me know in the comments down below if you think I missed one that should be in the top 10, and spoiler alert, I probably did. And be sure to like and subscribe if you want to see more videos like this one. See you guys soon.